Work it out for me, Paddy. Many years ago, Wolfe Tone was born on this day in 1763.
260 years ago, Joe.
Well
yes,
done.
indeed.
So if Wolfe Tone was alive, he'd be 260. But he's okay. 260 years ago, Wolfe Tone was born. Now, you, I don't know how to best describe you, Paddy. You were involved in Funny Friday. Then you moved on with the Camembert Quartet to the Late Late Show. Then you became a one-man show when around your love of history, which is legendary. Could I call you a historical entertainer, or would you take that as an insult?
That's what I like to call myself,
okay,
Joe.
Very good.
It's history, but it's entertaining.
Okay.
You know?
Now, your thesis, and we also have on the line Dr. Sylvie Kleinman. Sylvie, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Joe. Good afternoon, Paddy.
And
good afternoon.
Sylvie, you're based in the Department of History in Trinity College in Dublin. Okay.
Yes, and all my opinions today are my own.
Of course. And Paddy, all of your opinions are your own as well.
I should hope so, Joe.
And I thank you both for participating. Now, Paddy, it's about the death of Wolfe Tone, obviously in 1798. Was he murdered, or did he die by suicide? Now, what is your thesis?
Well, I'm doing a show around the country called The Murder of Wolfe Tone, Joe, so you can take from that I don't believe he committed suicide in prison. I believe that was the government version of events that we've taken as read for 225 years. But over COVID, I spent 18 hours a day for 2 months researching this deeply. I was like Carrie Matheson on Homeland, doing a massive wall chart of the last 10 days of his life.
Okay.
And I discovered through looking at newspaper reports, letters, everything else, the evidence to do with the razor, which is missing, that there's a whole heap of questions around his death, which really raises the issue whether the suicide story is accurate. You know, Tone arrived back. He was captured off Tory Island on the third French invasion that was meant to come to Ireland to help liberate the rebels during 1798. He was brought down to Dublin, got into his French regimentals, just as he was brought by horseback into Dublin, put on trial in a court-martial, which was quite strange because he was not a British soldier, he was a French officer. He's brought back to the jail. His legal team meet him saying at 11 o'clock on Monday, you're meant to be executed at 1 p.m. down by Newgate Prison, but at 11 o'clock we're going into Lord Kilwarden, the Chief Justice, and we're going to apply for you to come down and have your trial in the civil court. We don't think the court-martial was legal. So Tone knows there's people going to be trying on his behalf to free him, or to at least get another trial and delay his execution. He writes letters to Matilda. He says how tranquil he is. He even writes to his jailer, William Sandys, a very important figure, and I think the man who killed him, because he writes a letter saying, you know, I will die as a man, all of these things. That morning, the lawyer, John Philpott Curran, goes down, applies to the Chief Justice. Kilwarden says, yes, it's illegal what happened. Get Tone down to me now, and we'll have a proper civil trial down here. Sends a messenger up. William Sandys, the jailer, turns him away, saying, I don't take orders from you. Kilwarden's angry. He sends the messenger back up again. And this time, a French surgeon comes back and says, Tone tried to kill himself last night. He slit his throat from ear to ear with a razor, and we can't move him. I've done my best to bandage it up, all the rest of it. Tone lingers for 8 days. He's not allowed any visitors. He's put in a straitjacket, supposedly, so that he won't harm himself again, and yet manages to write these letters, which are fake, and have been proved to be fakes. They're in the National Library. They're in a completely different hand. He dies on the 19th. Sandys tries to get a stake put through his heart, which is what happened to suicides back then in the Catholic and the Protestant religions. Cornwallis, the big kahuna, says, no, you cannot do that, and Tone is buried in consecrated ground. We've never found the razor. We don't know why Sandys only revealed Tone's fate the second time, and this French surgeon, who later on writes a kind of a poem saying that it was possibly a bullet lodged in the throat, and it had to be disguised possibly as a throat wound. And of course, remember, the reason why this all happens is because if Tone dies in custody, in illegal custody, they're all up for murder. So whatever happens, Tone can't get away, and it has to look like a suicide. And it's of great benefit from that day to this to establishments, to the Catholic Church, who don't like Tone at all. They give him the nickname Cutthroat Tone, even though he fought for Catholic rights 50 years before Daniel O'Connell. So I make this whole case in the show. I've found letters that prove that there was a whole... And the biggest, the maddest thing of all is that they said Matthew Tone, his brother, who was executed 6 weeks before, had left the razor in the cell. This razor has never shown up, even though Sandys was a major collector of memorabilia. He had Tone's death mask, he had Emmett's death mask, he passed them down through his family, and yet this magical razor has never shown up. And we're meant to believe the brother was like Fergus Gibson, the red top psychic, and knew that his brother would be in the cell 6 weeks hence, even though it was a high security prison, and the razor might be considered a weapon. So the whole thing is very suspect.
Okay, now, Dr. Kleinman, Sylvie. Sylvie, thank you. You assert in your opening riposte to Paddy in the Irish Times when Paddy wrote this piece, the categorically assertive approach adopted by Paddy Cullivan in the article Wolfe Tone did not take his own life. He was murdered, and I know who did it. That's Paddy's headline. Reflects an outdated, sensationalist way of pronouncing on the past. It totally belies the objectivity we've grown accustomed to during the decade of centenaries. Sylvie, do you want to answer Paddy's charge?
Yes. Firstly, I just want to say one thing to your listeners.
Yeah.
I was introduced to Paddy by a very dear friend, Stephen Dunford, out at a 1798 reenactment in 2018.
Okay.
And Stephen had, I think Paddy was only just getting his show beginning that year, I believe, and Stephen was taken from us a few years ago by the most horrific cancer.
Oh, God.
An extremely creative, warm-hearted, lively, dynamic man. And I want to have an open, reflective discussion with Paddy today on the radio, for the simple reason that many historians and researchers now are doing the wall chart. Many of them have software programs, because we all watch TV and we all watch the police dramas, and we figure out, we try and piece all the evidence together. And I think we need to always be questioning. But the thing is, you see, so much, there's several layers in what Paddy has said. Firstly, that the razor never turned up. Well, so many things have disappeared. That if you don't find something, it doesn't mean, that it didn't happen. Okay. I do very much believe that the whole, it's too romantic, it's too good to be true, that he was in exactly the same cell as his brother Matthew, and that his brother Matthew had dislodged a stone and put a razor behind it so that his brother could find it. That's 19th century romantic history.
Okay.
Well, no, it's actually in the Morning Chronicle.
No, Paddy, I'm going. Paddy, I'm going to let Sylvie make a number of points.
You had your say, Paddy, and if you shout against me and across us, this isn't going to work, because we don't have that much time, and Joe probably has other things on.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
We'll leave it at that. Don't interrupt by saying I didn't mean to interrupt. This guy. Sylvie.
Edward Cook, the Undersecretary in Dublin Castle, also had a trophy museum. Can you believe he was brought, and no one knows where it is. He was given one of the extremely rare, because we've never found them. It's been described. In fact, Tone describes it in his diary. The green Erin go Bragh flag with the harp, with the uncrowned harp. Mm-hmm. And this was so outrageous that, the elites wanted a trophy of it. And he was sent one in Dublin Castle, and then he went back to England and somewhere in someone's attic. So let's just take another example of what happened during these crucial days in the barracks in 1798. I don't know if you're aware that this was extraordinary. The first year of the pandemic, a lot of collectible manuscripts was sold by Ian White's auction house that had been sold the previous year in London by Bonhams. Okay. And I was aware of this. And so Paddy rightly mentioned, he said the letters were fakes. So if you're saying they're not in Tone's hand, we also need to appreciate that some letters and some documents were copied verbatim to have an extra copy circulating. So I've also questioned exactly whether these notes and the notes to Sandus was in Tone's handwriting or not. It's not impossible he had dictated it. But let me just get back to the point. Do you know that the Adjutant General of the Royal Barracks, Major Hewitt, had documents belonging to Tone, and they were sold by his descendants. They were in an attic somewhere in England, and there was a copy of Tone's court-martial speech in Tone's handwriting, and the only other surviving copy we were aware of is in the Public Records Office in London, and we have a microfilm in the National Library. And I have two pictures, my phone held up to the microfilm reader in the National Library, side by side. It's unbelievable. It looks like a photocopy. There's just one or two differences. So what I'm saying is things pop up all the time. Okay. Now, I just want to make one final point, and then maybe you have another question to put to Paddy, Joe. In your article, Paddy, you very rightly speak about a kind of a... Now, you kind of seem to like conspiracy and cabal, but you refer to a military legal... You know, there was an elite running, and there were little... You know, but there are also private... in two private letters of grandees, there are two very important points that they both make, individual people, right? And they weren't all on a WhatsApp group sharing information. One of them says, rightly, talking about the court-martial from a legal perspective, the business has been botched. And then a few lines down, he says, I would have sewed up his neck and finished the business. Another person says, Tone, after, let's just say after the coat-throtting incident, Tone will live to be hanged. They wanted a public trial. They wanted to, just like Robert Emmett's, they wanted to make a statement to the public. This is what we do to a traitor. So to me, that's one of the reasons to think that a private murder, a private neutralizing of Tone would not have served the cause of counter-rebellion. I think personally that's something worth thinking about.
And Sylvie, just a couple of questions. Sylvie, what we were taught in school was that Wolfe Tone had taken his own life. Is that what you believe?
Well, I think so. In the letter, I have to say, with several friends now over the past 10 days, we've been re-looking at everything and we've been rethinking about it. And the problem with historians, we are like kids with a teddy bear. We hang on to something that's written down. No, we hang on to something that's written down, but we need to weigh everything up, and we also need to place ourselves in the mentality. There are several inferences in Tone's diary from the moment he's probably going to be given a commission in France, the end result being I will land on the soil from which I was banished. Mm-hmm. He was banished. He was told, you don't come back. If you come back, you know what the problem is. Even if he comes back in civvies, he was banished. Leave, it's a one-way ticket. So he makes all these jokes. He makes a joke once, just before Bantry. He says, I'll be, hanged like a traitor and disemboweled. And then in French, he says, they can disembowel me if they wish. Je m'en fiche, which means, je m'en fous, he says, which is the difference between saying I don't give a damn and I don't give a darn. And he says, I won't translate that because it's a bit rude, you know. Okay. So he's making these black humorous jokes. But in his son's editions and expansions, when he's publishing his father's papers, remembering once again, folks, William was 7 the last time he saw his father. He seems to make some hints, and I think they're credible, that Tone had said to his wife, don't worry, I won't be dishonored by a public hanging like a scoundrel and a traitor. See, don't forget, they had said they would cut his head off and put it on a pike in a conspicuous public place.
Which is what they were doing in France at the time, wasn't it?
No, excuse me. No, the terror was over, Joe.
Okay.
The terror was over. Not everyone got their head chopped off. That's why. Okay. Yeah. No, there were.
So,
there were
Sylvie, is it fair to say that you believe that Wolfe Tone tried to die by suicide, tried to commit suicide by cutting his own throat. He was found in time, so to speak, and the British kept him alive so they could kill him 2 days later.
Firstly, when we say the British, there was a colonial government, which Tone himself called an illegal second-hand government. He was very much against the system, and there were men who were Irish-born. If you look deep in the letters, it seems to imply that even if he were tried in a civil court, he would have been found guilty. And don't forget, he admitted the charge. I think he was escaping a dishonourable death.
Okay.
And just one other point. James Quinn, in his biography of Thomas Russell, makes a very, very valid point. They were extremely close. Thomas Russell was in Newgate, and apparently that it was in front of Newgate that Tone was meant to be executed, and possibly his head put on a pike. And he makes the point that that's maybe even another justification for him taking his own life. He was a strong character in many ways, and he'd had a lot of time to think about this. So I think on the balance of probability, and I don't think we will ever know for sure.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I think.
Paddy, just I know you alluded to it in your first contribution, but Sylvie said she believes it would not make. They would have tried him. They would have found him guilty anyway. You believe if Wolfe Tone had survived, there would have been time for him to be retried, and he would have been a free man. So the course of history would have been changed.
Not necessarily a free man, but there would have been a delay, and there was a lot of people. Remember, he's a very popular figure. Joe, he's well known.
So the thing then of my question: what difference does it make whether Wolfe Tone died by suicide or was murdered? He was murdered 2 days later, but why? What difference does it make to history?
It does make a big difference. It's funny, this man had amazing ideas. The unity of Protestant, Catholic, and dissenter. He was fighting for Catholic emancipation, even though he was a Protestant. All of these things.
That's why he's still revered, isn't it, by everybody? They're queuing up to go out to Bowdenstown.
Yeah, but I mean, remember this as well. If you kill the man, you kill the idea. But if he killed himself and he looks like a coward, that was a very big thing. Remember, in 1933, bishops in Galway were calling Tone cutthroat Tone from the altar. This was an insult, suicide, and it was to make him look bad to Catholics.
Paddy,
hold on, I'm
Paddy.
talking now. Sorry, and Sylvie, I listen and thank you so much. But I have to now make my point in refutation of yours, as Joe would understand. It was not a romantic thing whether he found the razor in the cell of the 19th century. It was reported in the Morning Chronicle on the 17th of November, the week he was still alive in prison, supposedly. This was a story that was being conjured and concocted in the newspapers all through the week. And I go through it day by day in my show, The Murder of Wolfe Tone. And it's a fascinating dissemination, really, of how these stories become common knowledge or become our history.
What difference would it have made to the course of Irish history? If your thesis is correct that he was murdered before he was executed, obviously, that's your thesis.
Of course, of Irish history. Well, I mean, heroic death. I'll say two other things because I want to refute some of the points, Joe. It's important. Cornwallis had already told Tone. Remember, he had asked to be shot. He said, "No, you won't be shot." On Sunday night, before Tone supposedly attempts suicide, Cornwallis gets back and said, you will be hung, but I'm remitting the order for beheading and piking. So he didn't have that horrible thing in front of him. That is true. Yes. So he didn't have that fear in his mind. Secondly, all his best friends, Henry Joy McCracken, Bartholomew Teeling, his own brother, had all faced the hangman. Tone doesn't put his uniform on in Balbriggan in the Man o' War pub and get back on in a full adjutant general's uniform because he doesn't want people to know he was a glorious French soldier. This man is a pure artist par excellence. This man would not let up the opportunity, if he is to face the hangman, on a stage and actually possibly make a last speech or face his executioners. This, one of the great orators and great writers of his time, is done in a prison. The biggest example of this is because the first time the messenger comes up, Sandys doesn't tell them Tone's attempted suicide. And yet the second time they come up, that's when the surgeon Lentane is sent down. Remember, both Sandys and Lentane had lost brothers. Sandys lost his brother at Vinegar Hill in 1798. Lentane had lost two brothers.
Let's Sylvie back in. Go ahead, Sylvie.
And I have to repeat one last thing. I'm sorry, Joe. There's one last thing. We talk about what William wrote, his son, in the book. But everybody seems to quote the things where he kind of semi-believes what happened to his father. But he objectively then turns around and says that on another thing, that it's well believed what happened in that prison could have been awful. Was it possible, fearing the interference of the civil courts, they hastened my father's end? Or more atrocious still, admitting the fact that he wounded himself, they intended to conceal it and glut their mean and ferocious revenge. That the preparation continued uninterrupted by the interference of superior authority, that the wound of their prisoner was concealed as long as possible, and that no one was allowed to approach or speak to him during his long agony, are certain facts. These are the words of William, who is definitely questioning the matter of his father's
Sylvie, I'll take a break in a few minutes, but go ahead, Sylvie. There's plenty of time. Go ahead, Sylvie.
I just don't see Tone's character as wanting to die on the scaffold. I don't see that. And I don't see that at all. That's the first thing. Secondly, I think very much...
hang on. Go ahead. Sylvie, go ahead.
Yes. No, I'm suggesting this, Paddy, you see. I'm suggesting this. And by the way, when you say the Morning Chronicle said they found the razor, you have to realise they did not have the technology to disseminate information, and it wasn't necessarily malicious that they were printing this. One newspaper said one thing, the Dublin Evening Post said he's recovering. They got several sources of information, and
Where did they get the story that the brother had left the razor? Morning Chronicle said his brother, he used the razor left by his brother in the cell.
Paddy,
Who made that
Paddy, you need to breathe a bit now, okay? Can we discuss this?
I know, I'm just saying who made it up.
No, let Sylvie respond.
But it's first of all, it was a huge prison barracks. We don't even know if he was in the same cell as Matthew. It doesn't really matter. And I want to get back to another point about what the Catholic bishop said here and what the Catholic bishop said there. And by the way, Tone was not unique. Tone was one of many enlightened United Irishmen. There were also many enlightened people who were not ready to pick up a gun or kill or be killed, as we now say about the 1916 generation. And they believed in toleration, and they believed in, let's not forget, almost all the penal laws had been dismantled at this stage. Okay, so elevating Tone as some kind of protean figure. By the way, he wasn't a great orator because he hardly gave any speeches. We know him more for his writings. Let's not forget his writings have survived. A diary, an autobiography, the act of picking up a pen and writing an autobiography. And thank heavens it survived. I mean, that's just extraordinary. But on the point of the Catholic bishops, what is the great irony about Bodenstown? How many tens of thousands of people have said the rosary over Tone's grave, completely impervious to what their bishops might think? Catholic Ireland revered Tone. And don't forget what Pierce said in 1913. I don't want you to revere him as a saint. I want you to love him as a man. So I think we just need to weigh up all the evidence, but the crucial fact of the brutality of the way of thinking was that they wanted a very public end. In and around 2016, a letter emerged. They put it up online in the National Library. I couldn't find the name of a very senior, and I think he was English, military person, who, when they heard that Constance Markowitz's death sentence had been commuted, I think he said, well, I'll wring her neck. And it completely echoes. It completely echoes the two guys. One of them, Sir George Hill, saying, well, I would have sewed up his neck to finish the job because they wanted a public execution. And I think he was avoiding...
I know this, but something happens in the jail. This is the point, Sylvie. Something happens once they get the message that Tone might get a reprieve and come down to the civil courts. That's when all hell breaks loose. Something happens whereby between the first messenger and the second messenger, something happens to Tone. He doesn't commit suicide. There's no razor. There's no evidence of it. No one's allowed to visit him. He writes this letter that's a fake. All these things are true. I go through it in intimate detail in the show. And I think everything else that we think and everything we want to think about it is, I've been accused of being unobjective. I think I'm being objective by looking at this and saying, why would we believe the government propaganda of the time. Why would that be the thing? And no matter what Tone writes about stuff like this, joking back in the day in 95, 96, 97, it's the weekend that he dies. He knows there's lawyers working for him. He writes to Matilda and he says, "I will die as I have lived, and you will have no cause to blush for me." How could he attempt suicide with a razor, have all the hours in the night to do it, and yet only be a quarter of an inch away from an
not
hit anything vital? You know, it's amazing.
Stay with us. I need to take a break because it is Liveline, and it's 1857. 0818 715 815. But before I do, Martin Snee, you've a quick question to ask Paddy.
Hello, Joe.
And a point to make.
Welcome back. Good to talk to you. Yeah. I just wanted to. I just can't see why the British authorities would murder Wolfe Tone and make it look like suicide when they could have tried him for treason and found him guilty and executed him, which
they were due to do 2 days later.
Which is the standard practice in dealing with rebels.
Simple, Paddy. What about that question? They were due to. Why would they murder someone they were due to kill 2 days later?
Because he was about to be sent down to the civil court, and anything could happen down there.
Okay, back after this break.
Talk to Joe on 0818 715 815. Talk to Joe on 0818 715 815.
So we're talking about the actual death of Wolfe Tone. Did he die by suicide by his own hand, or was he murdered by the establishment, so to speak, by the government at the time in 1798? Paddy Cullivan believes he was murdered. Dr. Sylvie Kleinman of Trinity College History Department believes that the story we have grown up with, i.e. that he tried to take his own life and it didn't succeed fully, but he did die from his injuries a number of days later. Sylvie, what difference do you think it would have made if Paddy's thesis is through?
First of all, I find it a little bit odd that some gossip wouldn't have emerged from the prison. If I think a little bit too much 100%ness is being attributed to Sandys and to Lantaigne. Now, it's true, perhaps, we only have certain things that have emerged in writing. I do think it's important, and I am not sure that he tried to delay the execution or whatever, but the more I think about it, the more I think there's a very strong chance that Tone decided his own fate. And this was extremely common in the late 18th century. Many political figures had taken their own life. Now, in different methods, different ways. Okay. And Paddy does make the valid point in his article about the risks, which physiologically, is, except that you have to do 2 gashes instead of 1. That we just don't know. I think it's important to establish factual history. But the other problem is, you see, and this has frightened people in a way up to this day, is that Tone's character jumps off the page from his writings. And let's face it, it's not until recently that Irish society has been able to handle, assertive characters full of self-belief. And I think it's his final act of assertiveness, of dying an honourable death. And that's more or less what his son says when he says it's the resolution of a noble mind to disappoint the brutal ferocity of his enemies, what we would say cheating the executioner. That's what I believe is most probably
the case.
How I would like to think the story ends.
Okay. Paddy, when is your next performance?
My next performance is in Tullamore in the Esker Arts Centre this Thursday, 22nd of June, and then I'm in Palcara on Sunday.
Okay.
And you go to paddycullivan.com for all the tickets.
Of course, yeah. Okay, okay.
And it's a great murder mystery. You'll enjoy it. And Sylvie, you know something? I'd love you to come along because I haven't seen you since our great friend Stephen died, and it was wonderful to mention
you gave me an invite. You gave me an invite
Absolutely.
to the Arts Club in Dublin, and I came.
And Sylvie, you did go, did you, Sylvie?
Yeah, and you didn't
this is
ask
back
me
at-
when my next performance was,
Yes,
Joe.
I was just about to say, because I know you
That was
go
in
to a number.
2018. That was in 2018,
History
Sylvie.
festival,
This is the new show. This
History
is the new
festival,
show.
Sylvie. When is your next performance, Sylvie?
No, I last Friday I gave a talk in DCU for the 18th Century History Society on Tone's writing, because he actually is, when he's writing, he says, when I am writing, I feel as if I'm chatting with my dearest love, Matilda. And the previous Monday I was in Paris giving at a Franco-British conference. It's great that the Franco-British are organizing conferences on republicanism, and I gave a paper, Is Tone the founding father of Irish republicanism? Which to me is kind of it's hagiography. You know, it's a need for a leader. It's a need for a protean figure.
And he was pretty good, though, Sylvie. He was pretty good.
It's a need. What you Sylvie, you're saying it's a need for heroes and villains in history.
Well, I think there are enough villains in history, but you see, in an emerging nation, and also trying to uphold the political mission of the United Irishmen, people look and seek for a founding figure, a leading figure, and I think that a little bit distorts Tone's contribution.
Okay.
But here I'm going to say one final thing briefly. What's very interesting, and I'm developing this at the moment, in the last few weeks of Tone's life and the days after, the authorities very much, now he'd already been on their radar screen a few years earlier, they very much want to prove that he was the founder of the United Irishmen and that he'd kind of seduced the Catholics to try and have a democratic representational system. So that is already emerging. It's a distortion. It's not true.
Okay.
But
that's why they thought he was the top dog, you know, and that's why they went for him. That's why he could not be allowed to get away.
I've got to leave it at that, but we all know how big a part Wolfe Tone even still plays in our day-to-day discourse, even in terms of bridges and streets and bands and break-up of bands and the real Wolfe Tones and the provisional Wolfe Tones. But my favourite Wolfe Tone quote is from Fluter in Sean O'Casey's wonderful The Plough and the Stars, where he says, thank you, Sylvie, by the way, Kleinman, thank you, Paddy Cullivan, where Fluter says, you can take out breakfast, dinner and tea on Wolfe Tone's grave in Bodenstown if you like, for all I care.
Talk to Joe on 0818 715 815.